personal learning list, and I'm really excited to be here. I don't think I've responded to an email from Melissa quicker when she asked if I wanted to introduce Tan and Beth, because they're two wonderful human beings who I've learned so much from over this past year. And I'm so excited now that their book is out and you're going to get to learn from them today firsthand. Just to tell you a little bit about each of them, Tan Huynh is a career international school teacher, consultant, and author specializing in secondary multilinguals and teacher collaboration. Tan's passion for this work is deeply rooted in his own experience coming to America at the age of 5 and the difficulties he faced acquiring a new language while continuing to honor and nurture his Asian heritage. Nowadays at school, Tan spends most of his time collaborating with teachers and in content area classes to make content accessible. The rest of the time is spent teaching English language and literacy skills. Outside of school, Tan often presents internationally to schools and districts to support their work with multilingual students. Tan also hosts a blog, online courses, and a very exciting podcast about teaching multilinguals. Beth Skelton is an independent consultant focused on creating equitable educational experiences for multilingual learners. She's been working in the field for over 3 decades, teaching elementary, middle, high school, and adult language learners in urban, suburban, rural, and international settings. And as a university exchange student to Germany, Beth experienced firsthand the challenges that experienced multilinguals face when studying new content in their non-heritage language. And this is an influential experience that still informs her work with students, teachers, and schools today. So again, I'm honored just on behalf of our whole Equity, PL, and Corwin editorial that we are the publisher of Tan and Beth's first book together, Long-Term Success for Experienced Multilinguals. They're both passionate advocates for multilingual learners and the valuable experiences and language skills that those kids already bring into the classroom every day. So you are in for a treat. I invite you to listen and learn and share. And without further ado, I want to turn it over to Tan and Beth.
Well, we are so excited and honored that you have come to the podcast, even though it's like your summer already, and some of you are just like a few days left. We are so appreciative. So let's get started to some practical strategies right away. Before I get there, can I ask you to type in the group chat, what are words associated with people who have dedicated years to achieving a goal? Such as Serena Venus Williams, who started playing tennis at age 5, or Nicholas McCarthy, who started playing piano. He's the only concert pianist who has one hand. Right? And so type in the group chat, and Beth, you could share what people are saying.
Dedicated, perseverance, passionate, advocate, grit, experience, persistence, focus. Perseverance comes up a lot. Experienced, grit comes up a lot. Determined, ambitious, committed, dedicated, disciplined, I can do attitude. They know their why. They're strong. Oh, these are great words. Motivated. Yes.
Do you notice they're all positive? Yet when we talk about the quote unquote long-term English learners, it's a negative thing, right? And so we're trying to switch that to a more positive perspective. And that's why we partnered with Corwin on their equity strand to support equity and inclusion through our book.
So when we ask who are experienced multilinguals, it's a term that Tan and I have coined in this book. And there really is only one in the US federal definition. And if Tan, you'd move that on, from the Every Student Succeeds Act, that they said that educational agencies in the United States have to report on English language learners who have not attained English language proficiency within 5 years of initial classification as an English language learner. Tan, if you back that off, thanks. And their first enrollment in a local educational agency. So that's a lot of legal language. But what I'd like you to do is in the chat, some of you saw the preview, is just really quickly, if you had to shorten that to like 5 or 6 words, who is this subgroup of multilingual learners that we're talking about here that used to be called long-term English learners, and we're trying to make a shift away from that term to experienced multilinguals? Who would be in that category? And you can type that in a chat, just like a summary statement. Nice, Tammy. They haven't exited within 5 years. That's a beautiful summary. Anyone else that has a different way of summarizing, you can go ahead and type that in the chat. social language experts, maybe don't have academic language skills. And then the details around that are in this federal definition, right? They can't get past, I love this, their language about the 5 years, since it's so unrealistic, as Sherry says. The kids are still in ESL over 5 years. Elizabeth says they may have been born in the US and they haven't exited by 5th grade. There'd be students in that category. Maybe it's learners that have plateaued. That's not necessarily in the definition, but these are sometimes the way we talk about them. So really from this definition, Tana, if you go ahead and put in the chat, the only thing that says who are these students is that they're classified as English learners for 6 or more years. So they have not exited whatever the program is within 5 years. So on their 6th year, they're part of this classification. And we're going to say, let's shift that to that positive perspective that we saw right at the beginning and notice how much these students can do and the experience that they bring. So go ahead, Tan, and who are these students in a different way of looking at it?
You can tell who they are by basically the way they write, not by the way they talk, but the way they write. Let me give you an example. My students were doing a 9th grade experiment where they had to change the distance of the lamp and to see how many bubbles the pond we created. These are the students that are beginners who we're not writing this book for. We will write another book for beginners in the future. They would say something like much bubble. Notice it's like not grammatically correct, but the concept is there. Experienced multilinguals would say something like this. There were more when the light was closer. But we're looking for students to shift to academically proficient language. When the light intensity increased, more bubbles were produced. Actually, even better if it's like when the light intensity increased, the rate of photosynthesis increased. Right? We're using our content-specific words here. Notice that both 9 words, but the grammar here is different. The sentence structure is different, and it's more specific with light intensity. That's what we're trying to have students. When we say, quote unquote, they're stuck or they're plateaued, they haven't transitioned from the social language. There were more bubbles when the light was closer to more academically proficient language. This is the kind of book we're writing for. This is the book we're writing for these particular students.
And so Jill said that was a really beneficial example. It's because Tan works with these students all day long. And these are the students that I spend a lot of time with. And he actually is like writing down what they're saying. They clearly understand the content, but there's something that is keeping them from exiting a program. And we think that we have the ability to support them and amplify their language proficiency. So we're going to take an assets-based approach. I'm going to ask you all to think of one of these students that we've been describing and you had in the chat. You know who this subgroup of students are. I'd like you to think of just one experienced multilingual student that you have worked with recently. And regardless of your role, you know this student at some level. Get that student in your mind, and then Tan, you can think of one asset that this experienced multilingual brings to the classroom. And that can be from their experiences, their linguistic, their cultural backgrounds, something that they are bringing that is truly an asset to your classroom. That's one option. Or you can think of a success that this student experienced this year. And that success the student experienced may have been when they did something outside of school, like a sport or work or one of the clubs that they were part of. I just saw a post from somebody that has their experienced multilinguals on a debate team. I just thought that is amazing, right? That is such a beautiful way of tapping into their expertise and building that language for them at the same time. So I see like throwing into the chat is super exciting. They bring their vocabulary from their heritage languages. They're able to transfer it. Oh, Amy, thank you. Amy Gutierrez, shout out to Utah, that they have artistic abilities. There's this pride in their culture and their experiences. Leah has a student that won an award. I love, Claudia, that navigate two different cultures and languages, or multiple languages and cultures. That word navigate is used frequently with experienced multilinguals, and you just see them going in and out very, very fluidly, depending on the context. That is an asset. How many of us can say we can do that so easily? Tan, anything else that jumped out at you that you want to call out?
No, I'm just impressed that you can narrate these things and say it so authentically.
Oh, no, it's because it's coming in and it just fits. So in the book, our first chapter is really about making this affirming shift that you just did in the chat. Thank you so much. About like sharing these assets, that their linguistic and cultural background, their capability of learning grade level content within the mainstream classroom, given the supports and scaffolds that we're about to present for you, is that we're going to shift away from that old label that's deficit based, that somehow long-term is a negative. And that's why we called our book Long-Term Success. We're going to turn that long-term on its head and say, no, we want success even outside of the school. And we know our kids are capable of that. So that's where the shift is happening to experienced multilinguals. And we hope that you will join us in this march to shift that language and make an asset-based, affirming shift in how we think about these students, how we work with them, and how we address them.
It goes back to the words that you described before. Like, think about a person who has dedicated years. Those are the words we want to use with our experienced multilinguals.
So in the book, we present a framework for working with experienced multilinguals. And this framework relies heavily on the work of Jay McTighe and Grant Wiggins in their understanding by design. And really all we've done is added that language focus to what their seminal work is. So we start with this analogy of, we can't see the forest for the trees, but we're going to use an orchard because orchards produce fruit. And we want our students to be able to produce fruit, meaning output of reading or writing and speaking. And so we start with thinking about that final or summative assessment. And as we're planning, we're thinking about what's the language, the academic language in that final assessment. What are students going to have to be able to do? Will they be writing a report? Will they be answering short questions? What is the language demand of each of those? And we look carefully at engineering that summative assessment so that it is a test of their ability in content, not just a reading and writing test. And Tom's going to get into that shortly. And then we go backwards plan. Each lesson or each tree forms part of that orchard, the big picture. So each individual lesson is building toward them producing all the fruit in the orchard. And so we're going to write an integrated objective that has language and content together. And then we have to look at how do we provide all the inputs that are going to make that orchard thrive, meaning that each lesson be comprehensible. We're going to add sun and rain, all of the inputs that students need to understand the content. And then finally, we're going to support that output. And that's the last one, Tom, the fruit of the orchard comes out because we've supported their speaking and their writing, their academic language comes out. So this kind of backwards design metaphor of planning from the final assessment, each lesson, and that each lesson has input and output supported.
We're going to first start with our backwards design, thinking about our orchard, which is engineering summative assessments. Let me give you two things that we're going to look at. We're going to look at knowledge-based assessments where kids sit down and they have to, they are at the time test that you're very used to. We're also going to do performance-based assessments where students have to do something over a series of days, weeks, or months to produce something. Maybe this is a report. Maybe this is an essay. Maybe this is a presentation, something that it's not just a sit down, but it's multiple days or weeks of engaging with the project. Let me give you an example from my 7th grade class. We were looking at ecosystems. And you have questions here, like using the following food chain to answer question A, B. Which organism is a secondary consumer? If hawks were removed from the food chain, what is most likely to happen if the number of organisms in the food chain circle the best answer? What might prevent experienced multilinguals from fully demonstrating their understanding of this slide? Can you type in the group chat? Beth, you're so good at narrating. Can you continue to do that?
You bet. So the vocabulary is coming up as one of the things that might prevent them from fully demonstrating. Yvonne is saying there are no visuals. Words like increase and decrease could be causing issues. There's so many words on the page. There's that if hypothetical. They have these examples that students may not know the example that's given. And then again, vocabulary coming up. So and I love this one, the format and the structure of the test itself. A lot of words. People are saying the content of the assessment's not comprehensible. They're going to need some definitions and pictures. There are no scaffolds at all. Some people are suggesting a chart. And then just the fact that it's multiple choice kind of is a tricky one.
So what I did was I sat with my content teacher and said, okay, I'm going to look at this assessment. I'm going to take it back and I'm going to modify it. And then you can tell me which parts do you think is over scaffolding or not enough. So this is what I did. Get ready to see this. I added pictures of each of the things. Lettuce, green flies. I didn't know what a green fly was. Ladybug, sparrow, and hawks. But then I added words such as removed, taken away. Right? And the word increase and decrease, I added arrows for down, arrows for up to show increase and decrease. And then I brought in the images back down here one more time. Right? This is how we make things more equitable. So they're not reading assessments. The questions were not watered down. They were not removed. They're not less questions. It's the same amount of questions, same type of questions, just a different way to scaffold the assessment. Right.
And I'm going to answer, Isel has a great question. Yes, as experienced multilinguals, they would definitely have experience with these kind of tests. But what we're trying to do, and thank you for that question, is not take away the fact that, yeah, you've got to answer tests that have multiple choice, or you've got to answer short answer. We're just saying, we're not going to expect you to know what green flies is unless that was specifically taught in the class. Now, if it were specifically taught, I may not need that arrow. But because the teacher put on a random food web and the kids are expected to know that hawks are at the top, sounds like, no, let's put in the pictures. And they can now determine if green flies are taken out, what happens, or, if hawks are taken out, what happens to green flies? Do they increase, decrease, whatever? So I think it's about making sure that it's not just the format of the test. They have experience with that, but it's the language behind it. If that sounds fair, Tan, I thought her question was great.
Thank you for answering that. Let's continue here. This is an example of unscaffolded instructions. Can you share in the chat why these instructions are unscaffolded? Introduce your ecosystem, the food chain in your ecosystem, and why it is important. Then make sure to explain how humans have affected this ecosystem. Make sure you write in 500 to 600 words. Can you type in the group chat? What would make this unscaffolded?
Oh, Alexis caught a big one. It's a two-part question. Elizabeth is saying they have to produce a lot of words. They can, Elizabeth, and Tan has some actually excellent examples of when we engineer this kind of performance-based assessment that a student pre-engineered and post-engineered, they can produce those 500 to 600 words. It's just how are we supporting it? Right, Kaylin, there's no rubric other than these are how many words you need. A lot of words in the instruction. Maybe not clear about what does it mean, introduce your ecosystem. Again, the vocabulary, there's like no scaffolding for the process of how to do this. There's no sentence frames, the directions aren't broken down. And yet this is what our students are given so often as the only assessment. And then when their responses are less than 500 to 600 words, or they don't do exactly what's expected, they're not scoring as high as they possibly could when Tom shows you how we can support.
And the sad thing is someone posted in the group chat, they said, then they are referred to special education, right? They're overly represented. Why are multilingual students overly represented in special ed when they're not the largest population of students in the school body, right? Why is that happening? Oh, because we say, well, something cognitively wrong with them. There's nothing cognitively wrong with them. It's the clarity of the instruction that they need, such as, what does introduce mean? This is the equity part. Yes, you got it all right. This is part one. There's a two-part question. And in part one, there's like so many things students have to do. Right? We just assume they know what introduce means. We assume they know what, say, food chain in your ecosystem is. Right? This is how I did it. Beth and I worked on something called instructional boxes. Is part, like the top box is colored and the bottom box is where students write. In the top part is where I write the questions. Identify where your ecosystem is found. This is the introduction part, meaning countries, regions, hemispheres. So very specific. I want you to describe the food chain in your ecosystem. Producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary. Students, people in the group said, oh, they need a word bank. This is their word bank. They have to make sure that they include this. And then the last part is explain why your ecosystem is important, meaning what does it produce and what does it protect? Notice how I initially, when I looked at these slides again yesterday before coming on, I had guiding questions like, where is your what is the food chain in your ecosystem? Why is da-da-da-da? I decided to change these guiding questions into content, into tier 2 words. Students need to know what identify is, what describe is, what explain is. So when they go from science to gym, from gym to music, they say these words again, they're not going to be confused.
And I'm going to interrupt because Itzel has another phenomenal comment. She says, never ELs, so kids that go home and speak English or those that were never identified could use this level of support as well. And Tan, tell your experience of working with teachers when you give them this scaffolded performance-based assessment back. What do they say?
They usually say, this is so clear, let me give it to all the students. So really, I only have 6 students that I work with on my caseload, quote unquote. But I work with, because I work with 2 grades, I work with 200 students, 100 students in grade 8 and 100 students in grade 9. And the best part is I'm working with all of them, even though I'm not standing at the board teaching them what an ecosystem is. But when they receive this document that is clear, they are more successful. And now teachers have been using this structure of instructional boxes to meetings. When I come to meetings, they say, oh yeah, I already created this based upon what we did before. I said, this is now I know that in the future, I might need to plan with them less and let me move to another teacher because they already have this skill. Let me show you the next part. Part 2, describe how humans have disrupted the ecosystem. And I said, describe the human activities in the ecosystem, describe what was taken out, reduce in numbers, or lost. And I do add a guiding question here. Explain how did this affect the ecosystem? Now describe what was increased. And how did this affect the ecosystem? Now, this is what I did additionally. For students who really needed the support, I already provided this. Like I already have another document waiting in the sides if they need this. So I added the sentence frame. Unfortunately, human activity has disrupted your ecosystem. Some of the ways that humans have disrupted the balance are by, as a result, the blank loss. The loss cause. So as you notice, I'm not going to read the rest of it, but you notice I used these sentence starters or these prompts to write the sentence frame, the paragraph frame. So now look at the transitions. Unfortunately, as a result, the loss caused. Additionally, this is kind of the language that students are not using when they're talking with friends at the cafeteria, but this is the language we need them to have when they're producing for school or for their careers.
Amanda is making an amazing comment that comes up is actually where we're going. So Amanda, thank you for the lead in. She said, using the verbs to start those statements that describe, define, explain, that those verbs are like success criteria for her and they reflect on their writing. And this is huge. And we're really pushing, as Diane says, that content teachers think students know what it is to describe or explain, but we actually have to teach it explicitly. And that's what some of what Tan is doing in the frames is starting to explicitly teach it. Thanks.
So equitable assessments in content classes assess the content. They are not to assess the reading or the writing. This is why when we engineer assessments, it's more equitable for students.
And what you saw Tan do is a strategy debrief. He modeled strategy. So for an annotated exemplar or a diagram, instead of just like telling you about how to engineer a performance-based assessment, he annotated it, he showed it, and then he said, look, this is the paragraph frame. Notice, here are the statements. So this is actually a strategy that we are teaching teachers to use as well. Don't just give the exemplar, but annotate the exemplar. What is the first question doing? What is this part doing? Make it really clear for the students about what that mentor text is. If they're providing a mentor text at all, then annotate it and make that even clearer. So that's one strategy that Tan was modeling as he went through. And
when we think about experienced multilinguals, they have the cognitive ability to say, I'm stuck right now. What can I do? What learning strategy can I use that teachers have taught me? So we can teach students to ask teachers for prompts, guiding questions, and how to segment the instructions. If they receive instruction that looks like this, the students can self-advocate and say, can you write the guiding questions? Like, can you give me the guiding questions of what I'm supposed to produce for the introduction part? And then so they're self-advocating if the teacher doesn't provide this.
And as a learning strategy, Tan, if you go back, I'm looking at Shauna's comment, and she's saying this is something that teachers can actually teach students to do themselves. So some of the teachers that I work with, they push back and they say, I'm not going to provide all of those sentence frames, but I'm going to teach my students how to take that guiding question or the guiding prompt and turn it into their own sentence starter. And as long as they're willing to take the time to teach that, it helps all students, and it is a life skill that they can use beyond just the school day. They can use that in their work world, in filling out applications, anything else that they have to write, if they know how to take the prompt and turn that into their own sentence starter. So that's a learning strategy that we highly encourage teachers to be very explicit about. This is a learning strategy that can support you outside of this classroom even.
I'm noticing that Geneve, I'm sorry for the pronunciation, he said, like, these are the responses, and the transcript is so helpful. Please continue to write responses and share. This is the way to engage. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And then James, you're talking about UDL, about the universal design for learning. Yes, and that was a piece of what we looked at as well, is that what is good for all learners? How do we make sure that there are multiple access points? And that's where we're going now, is how do we make the content that the students are getting, whether it's math or science or social studies, how do we make that comprehensible? So Tan, the comprehensible input.
When we think about working with students, we think about two things. How can we make content more understandable for them? And then we'll look at the output later, but how can we make presentations, videos, articles, our lectures more accessible for them? And then we're going to look at that now.
Yeah, so I'm going to present a text that would be something kids might be reading in 6th grade, 7th grade. And when the text comes on the screen, I'm going to ask you to say, without simplifying the words, yes, I could run it through like a ChatGPT and have it simplified. Yes, I could put it through Text Compactor or Rewordify. There's lots of technology to make this simpler. But our multilingual learners who have experience in our schools need to be able to access, understand, read, comprehend grade level text. So we're not going to change the grade level text, the language in it. We're going to amplify it. So what could we do to make this text even more comprehensible if students are decoding? So we have to assume that they have the skills to sound out the word volcano. What kinds of things could I do to amplify this text without simplifying it? And you can type that in the chat. Yay, Amy! Go ahead, add a section heading. You bet. I could add some visuals or icons. Oh, the number 600. Thank you. I might have to put that number in. Yadira, we could do some things around vocabulary and maybe even in the text itself. You bet. They could sketch note as they read, Dora. I love it. Oh, diagrams, Fiona. I'm going to take a lot of your ideas. We could put a word behind the larger vocabulary, chunk it up, Sherry, you bet. And so all of these ideas, if I put them together, we could engineer this text. So let's see what this was my version. And Tan, as you click through, I'm going to annotate what I did. I added a guiding question. Amy Gutierrez suggested a heading. Either way, I added a guiding question, which helps the students focus on what's the key information in this chunk. So somebody has said chunking, and I did that. Chunk the text. The next one, somebody suggested adding images, and I'm going to say with a caption. So just throwing an image in may or may not support them because they're like, what does this picture even represent? So we have a teacher created caption that is like the reason why that image is there. And then you also notice that image has the caption for eruption, and there's the angry gods in it. And then I did some other things that you guys suggested, and that is the graphic, infographic. Someone noticed that right away that numerical information is going to throw kids off, the number written out, and then how do I get my head around 50 to 60 are active and there's 600 total? I just created an infographic, and you can see that the 60 that are active looks different than the others. And then I added some synonyms because somebody talked about vocabulary. So I know my students know the word interested. They may not know intrigued. So after intrigued, just put interested. You know this word, keep going. And then I also added some translations. I did this intentionally in Spanish because that's the majority of the students that I tend to work with in my context. But I also wanted to show that I'm making connections to cognates. So ancient ancestors, the antepasados antiguos, I'm like, you can see there's a connection there. Or volcanoes that erupt, entrar en erupción. So again, I want them to start to notice cognates so that they can do this on their own, which is what Tan is going to share, is that anytime we ask teachers to do a strategy, both of us are thinking, could students do this? Could we teach students to do this so that they have the skill on their own without relying on us? We don't want to create dependence, but rather independence for long-term success. So Tan, how have you used this same strategy with your students?
Let's continue. I'll share them in a second.
Yeah, this is, oh, sorry, I have a math word problem as well. This was the original word problem. And some of the teachers I worked with, they said, I can do this with math. And so you can see here is the way that this teacher modified or engineered the math word problem, kept the same thing, didn't give anything away. We have a visual, you can see with labels and images. We have some translations of key terms so the students know what they're talking about. And then he highlighted the key information that they're going to need to solve the problem.
And this is what Beth asked for. How do I use this with my students? You're actually seeing a screenshot from my 8th graders. One is Khmer and one is Korean. And I'm having students read a text together. And as they read it together, they're on the same Google slide and they're annotating words that they don't already know. For example, I know that they don't know the word portion, but I added the word part. Right, already there for them. But I realized that they didn't know, some of the kids didn't know the word commonly. One of my Korean kids didn't know known, right, and the word force. So they are now learning to say, oh, Mr. Tan taught us a strategy to annotate. I can annotate when I don't understand. And this is how they become more independent for the long term. And I use this with my students as well. Both Sean and Aaron were asked, all students were asked to read an article. And at the end of the paragraph, at each one, they have to stop and they have to summarize together. They have to agree on the summary, and then one person annotates it. So the person who, they just take turns annotating. And you're seeing an actual example of what students are doing here in August 26th in 2021. So this is what I'm teaching my students. So because when they go to college or when they go next to grade 7, they can annotate the text when they don't understand it. They have that skill in their toolkit now. Let's move now. So we just moved from establishing comprehensible input, but let's look at the academic language. How do we structure that? When we think about comprehensible input, we say, how can we help students express their ideas more academically, orally, through writing, and through visuals? Let me give you an example of an actual thing that I taught my students in grade 10. We were supposed to teach them business concepts like a competitor analysis, startup costs, break even, variable costs, all these things that they had to write a business plan for a hypothetical food truck. And so they were applying these concepts to a food truck. This is an actual example of one of my Thai students made something that's closely responsive to her. Okay? And we focused, let me show you what I did with the academic output for the promotion. Students know what a promotion is, but they do not know how to write it. And so this is what I did. A Thai food truck would be amazing. Yes, Jill. I actually went into the community to look for specific promotions that are in Thai. Dusatani is a very famous hotel and a restaurant chain. And so I looked at theirs. And I looked at Chinese New Year or the Lunar New Year. And they have a promotion here. And in the gym, this is an actual image of like two flyers in Thai that were promoting certain meals, right? And I said, wow, this is a wonderful example to show my students. I took a picture and I shared it with them as real examples of the output, right? We're giving them a goal to move towards. But I wanted them to be more academic than just like these limited words here. So this is what I did. I made it more specific for them. I added the image here, and then I gave them very clear text. I know some people are like, whoa, that's a lot of reading. Experienced multilinguals can read, right? We're not working with beginners. They just need the clarity of what to produce, right? So this is what I did. And I explained to students and I let students write. I didn't give them like my own example of like a text, because then they're just going to copy. I gave them this to see an authentic example. And then I gave them really clear steps. Students then produced a paragraph and I went home and I reviewed them. And the next day when kids came back, I showed them an example. I said, this is what Pan did. And I showed the student that has the closest to what we're looking for, the best example. And then I annotated for students. I said, yes, look how Pan started with a specific cultural event connected to his food truck. Look at the specific time frame that he provided. And then he explained the math behind the promotion, which were the instructions. And then he also explained how this promotion will help the food truck. Where did he get all that? He got it from the very specific instructions that I provided here. Remember, these are 10th graders. We're not reducing the rigor. We're actually making it more clear so students can do that. So here's the learning strategy. Teach students to seek out or ask for a mentor text so they can analyze the language. If I didn't provide an example mentor text, I could have. I just provided really clear instructions. Students can simply ask this as well of their teacher. Beth?
Yes. And so you've seen basically us walk through this lesson planning template, which we are giving you as part of the book, but it's a free, if you go into that QR code, you can download this. We started with that end of unit summative assessment, and Tan gave some really specific ideas of how to engineer either a test, kind of like a sit down paper and pencil sort of test, or if it's a performance-based assessment like you just saw with the food truck. So we start with that end of unit assessment. And then we're going to get into some kind of integrated objective for each lesson. And that is really clear about what do we want students to be able to do by the end of the lesson, not the whole unit, but that lesson builds up toward the end of the unit. And we have teachers write an exit ticket prompt, like you saw, describe the blah, 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 compare something, justify. And to get to the language, the really easy win on this is we just have teachers write out what they would love to hear or see. And so we actually take the text that the teachers produce and analyze the language in there and say, oh, that's the language I have to teach in this class to make sure that students have the ability to produce it in the end. And that's that integrated objective idea. And then once you know the vocabulary, the sentence structure, that discourse, what's the beginning, middle, and end, Then you can establish the comprehensible input around it using all of the strategies that we were modeling with, like engineering the text or providing a video clip, all the things that work for making the comprehension when I'm inputting. And then finally, Tan showed how do I then support that academic output at the end. So that's really the lesson planning template that follows our framework for instruction. And yes, Jill, all this information and more is in the book. And what we do is each chapter models this lesson planning template from math to science to social studies, language arts, design, the arts. We go through different content areas and show and model how all of this works in different content areas. So go ahead, Tan.
Sherry said that I grade 3 classes. So this lesson planning, well, our book is for 5th grade to 12th grade teachers, but really this lesson planning template is from K to 12. Like, who doesn't need an end of unit assessment and all the lessons that go back to it, right? Who doesn't need an integrated objective? Well, every lesson has to have some comprehensible input and output. So this can be used from K to 12. We created this specifically to say, if they were planning with you and I, Beth, what would they need? What was their process? What is our process? And this template is the embodiment of our co-planning together, right? And then I also love this. Amanda Lewis said, love, we are not reducing the rigor, but we're making it clear of what is expected. That is equity. Dr. Brene Brown said, clear is kind. And that book, this is our goal of this book, to not reduce the rigor, to be kinder to students by having instructions clearer.
And Lisa's talking about her department, EAL department, is they're focusing on the integrated objective. And Lisa, I know that SIOP is really big into having a language and a content objective. We just find that integrating makes a lot of sense. We're nothing against SIOP, but it just makes sense for content teachers to say, this is my content objective. You have to justify why this food truck, blah, 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 using, right? And then that by, that becomes the language, and it's super clear. And when Tan and I were saying, if we plan with teachers, how do we do it? My first question to any co-planning situation that I work with, a social studies teacher, a math teacher, a science teacher, is I say, what should students be able to say or write at the end of this period? And that's how I start the planning session. So it's this template. And I have to know what the final assessment is as well.
Yes.
So.
And this is a free template, so you don't have to buy our book to get this. We specifically said, like, if teachers have no financing, what can we do to give them? So this webinar plus this template. Let's move back to, so we just looked at all of the framework, the orchard, the tree, the sun, and the comprehensible output, the tree, the fruit. So now that is how we structure learning for experienced multilinguals. But we don't just want the teacher lottery, where one teacher, where everyone wants that teacher. Or we know that when those students go to that teacher, they're going to have a great year. We want everyone to feel like, all students at the school to feel like, I won the school jackpot because all of my teachers are planning this way. We have our last chapter is like, how do we take all of this and make sure that all teachers are doing that? Well, in August, we have August 8th, we have a district leader specific webinar that to show teachers how to be part of this. And so we are partnered with English Learner Portal to give teachers or leaders who are joining this webinar free access to the webinar, the course. It's 15 hours of content for free for 2 weeks so that they can learn how to implement this. And we'll talk about, if you're a leader, if you're a district, if you're a department head, if you have someone who has the ability to get this information to more people, please ask them to come, because we're going to give this away to say, how can we prevent the teacher lottery and how can we implement this school-wide?
Yeah, this is really bringing that framework, the orchard and the trees, across the school. So if you yourself are a school leader, district leader, state leader, this webinar is really for you, because it's beyond the individual teacher in the classroom, where it's beyond the individual EAL teacher or English language development teacher. It's how do we get this then school-wide? So yeah, it will be online, Jill. And let's see, Corwin will send out through everyone who signed up here the information for how to sign up for that webinar. So that's where you'll look for the Corwin email about that. Thanks.
In addition, we want to share with you a free, we're thinking about ways to get teachers to read this book without having all these expenses besides the book. So we are doing a free, we're joining with ML Chat Book Club for live Twitter chat. So no webinars. We're just going to be online and just tweeting questions about the book, and people were responding to it. We asked teachers to read a chapter by a certain date, which is always Saturday. And then at 7 to 7 p.m., 7:30 Eastern time, we'll come and do just chat and we'll talk live about the book. So that's another offering. Bring your colleagues. It's kind of like a guided book study with Beth and I. Just another offering for you.
And Jill, the book is available on Amazon. It's available through Corwin. It's available through my website. So you can get the book in a lot of places. And then the Twitter chat, that ML Chat Book Club, that you have to be on Twitter, but it's free. And so it's 7 to 7:30 Eastern Standard Time in the US. And we're just going to be answering questions and talking to people chapter by chapter. So great.
Don't buy on Amazon because we're going to give you a discounted code just in a second.
And then if you or your staff, I know there's a lot of leaders on this that are interested, we are running a book study course, and it is worth 1 university credit. So it's a 15-hour asynchronous book study course. So Tan and I have recorded videos. We've talked to ourselves on the video, recorded those, and then it provides time for reading each chapter and then trying out some of the activities. Each of the chapters have a try it out or a reflection. And so that's how teachers will get that 15 hours of asynchronous work, and it's worth a university credit through University of Massachusetts Global if they choose. So we'd love to see you there. That launches on June 12th. Great. There's 2 questions that I can see that are content related, and one is about special education, and then one is about ChatGPT. So we'll start with that special education one. We acknowledge in the book that experienced multilinguals are overrepresented in special education. There is a lot of research going on right now, and I would say, I typed in the chat at one point, Karen Thompson, Dr. Karen Thompson out of Oregon is probably the foremost expert in this area right now. She's doing a lot of the research, and the 2 big questions that she's juggling are, number one, are they identified as having special needs in elementary school? And they really do have learning needs, and that is preventing them from exiting. And so that's an equity issue where whatever the testing is has to accommodate for growth, but maybe because they truly have a special ed need, they're not exiting the program. So that's one area to look at. And then the second area is, were their needs not met early on? And now we get into middle school and these students are not growing the way that we would anticipate. And so they're being referred to special education because we no longer know what to do with them for language acquisition. So that's another question. And it could be that it was an unidentified learning need that is now being identified. So it's a tricky one to tease apart, but what we know is that many of the strategies that we're providing here will support all of our experienced multilinguals, whether they're dual identified or not. We know that these strategies will support them in their language growth and development. So this book does not try to tease apart, learning needs, language development. We're saying this supports all of the learners across the board. Tan, did you have anything else to add to that about the special learning needs?
No, but besides just saying, have we scaffolded for the input? Have we scaffolded for the output? Have we written a model response? Those should be the first things we look at before we say, oh yeah, they should really go to special ed or be referred, right? And so the lesson planning template prevents students from being overrepresented, even though there are some who do require both services. But we don't want to say, just because you're taking a long time to learn in English, which is like Cummings says, it's 5 to 7 years for academic language. It's normal.
Right. And then there's a great question from Elizabeth about that ChatGPT. And I know we're all starting to play with this, and how do we make this a useful tool? One way that I'm doing it is actually generating my own model responses. It's super fast and it gives me language models. You have to check, is the content correct? That's maybe the content expert, but I'm looking at language models of how did it describe something? How did this ChatGPT justify? What's the language of justify? And it's pretty fascinating because, as you know, from this AI, this artificial intelligence, it is a language model. So it's actually tapping into how we use language to inform, narrate, argue, explain. It knows that. So I am looking at creating my own language models as mentor text to show students how they can use it to learn, right? They can actually create their own mentor text for learning. Larry Ferlazzo is another one I would recommend. He has written several great posts recently about how he is using ChatGPT with his experienced multilinguals in California. Pretty impressive work there.
Beth, the comments are coming so fast and furious. I don't know if you saw this question or maybe missed it. Amanda asked, what are ways you address teachers and principals who feel like these ideas shared are over scaffolding?
So one way is, it's fine if you don't want to add those sentence frames or you don't want to add the word bank, but are you explicitly teaching it? So I addressed one teacher who was super pushback. It was an 8th grade English language arts teacher. And she said, I'm not going to provide the frames. And I said, so do your students know how to respond to a compare question? And can you teach that explicitly? And what was really funny about that is that the daughter of the English language development teacher was in that class, and she goes home and speaks English. And she came to her mom after this lesson where I co-taught it. We explicitly taught students how to deconstruct a prompt and answer it. And she came home and was like, Mom, I am so much more prepared for the final now. They taught us how to answer the question. So I'm fine if you're going to explicitly teach the skill set. That's that learning strategy, right? But if you're not going to take time to explicitly teach it in math or in science, I get it. You may not have time for that. Then scaffold the content, the language that students need for the content expression. Ton, other ways that you've worked with teachers and administrators about over scaffolding?
Yes, I actually want to share my screen because we did this for my school. We presented an inquiry like, how much should we scaffold? Because I love scaffolding. Right. And I just want to show you what we did. This is the beginning of the school year. This is what a student produced because we gave sentence starters. Right. And the student just answered the question. Right. Just answered the questions using the ... and then filled it in. But there was no connection. We stepped back and said, oh, my goodness, what did we do? This is not helpful. So this is what we did. We actually wrote out in the evaluation, they have to put 2 things, the headings here. And in the evaluation and methodology, they have to talk about identify at least 1 strength, identify at least 2 limitations. For your improvements, think about what has the greatest impact, identify the strength of the improvement and identify the limitation. Now, notice how we didn't use sentence starters or sentence frames or paragraph frames. And yet this is what the student produced. The same student produced this work in May. We were so taken back, wow, we think we have an answer or response to over scaffolding. Teachers don't have to write the sentence starters unless you're working with beginners or students who are at that level. They just possibly need clearer instructions on what to write for the evaluation, what to write for the improvement. And that's not over scaffolding. That's saying, I expect you to do this, this, and this. I believe that you can, so I'm going to make it more explicit for you, right? And then this is the result. What I recommend with teachers is that they actually have this. They show an example of not unscaffolded and an example of appropriately scaffolding and show the before and then show the after. It's not just about the amount of writing here, but these are the ideas the students came with. But and look how the specific they're using. They're using numbers here. And look at the last one. There are no numbers, right? And this is why we have to share with students, with teachers, how to appropriately scaffold.
Okay, we are at time, 4:30. What a wonderful presentation. Thank you, Beth and Tan, so much for joining us. And yes, we will be sending out a follow-up email with a link to the webinar recording, the chat transcript with people's names removed, and a link to Beth and Tan's slides. And if you get Corwin emails, you'll be getting emails about all of the amazing opportunities they have coming up this summer for additional webinars and book chats, because we definitely want to make sure people know about those. So thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you, Melissa and Megan and Corwin. It is a pleasure working with this fabulous publishing company.
Thank you again for showing up for your students at the end of the school year. Hopefully this will launch you into a wonderful year next year.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.